First, it's a pleasure to be here on your wonderful campus. It's just a beautiful place, and just really excited to be here. Thank you so much, your distinguished your members of government, members of the faculty here, Mr. Mayor, and all of the students and members of government. So just delighted to be here. I've been with Intel over 30 years, and each year I travel to about 40 different countries a year, and I want to share some of those concepts with you. And also in Intel, I've lived in 3 different geographies, 5 different countries in those last 30 years. So I want to share some thoughts with you what's going on right now. IT is clearly a business that Intel's in. It's where we do a lot of our driving in there. And right now, we're in a massive global recession. And so one of the most popular conversations is about investment. Where do you invest? And what can IT do for your businesses, for the people, for jobs, and for countries, and for education? And this is some information taken in the United States. It was done by ITIF. This was a think tank that was part of the advisory group in the transition government of President Obama. And what they showed in this is, if you look at this, back in 1948 to 1973, most of the growth in the US economy, the GDP, was driven by the manufacturing sector. You can see that in the light blue. And information technology, in its very early stages, was a very tiny piece of that. As you went into the 70s and the 80s, IT became a bigger driving force behind the growth in the US economy. And it's very interesting to look in the dot-com times back in 1995, the era of the internet. Everyone got on the internet, companies became much more linked. Look at that growth in GDP, and IT is a very, very big piece of it. It not only grew the economies quicker, but it was a huge, huge piece. So you could argue that in the internet era, IT has been a very, very big driver of productivity, certainly in the United States, but if you look around the world, in many other countries would show you very similar information. So that's one piece of information we keep behind us. Now, a second study was done by ITIF, very popular now, that said in a recessive environment, a tough jobs environment, tough economies, how can you create jobs? So one of the studies done by this think tank, again, ITIF, said if you was to spend on different areas, you spend on broadband, $7 billion on broadband, how many jobs would that create? Or if you spend on salud, so healthcare, how many jobs would that create? Or if you spend on green new energies, what would that create? And if you look at this, there's about a $30-odd billion spending recommendation here, and it would create over 1 million jobs. Half of those, more than half, would be in PMEs, small and medium businesses. And if you look at one of the most efficient ways of creating jobs, it's broadband. That broadband to bring more people connected and more people into the economy. And you can probably see per dollar, the banda ancha, the broadband, is probably the most effective way of doing this. But all of those create many jobs, and they create more than half those jobs in PMEs, in small and medium business. So that's a study that we think about as we talk to different countries. Now, I sit on the board outside Intel. There's one company I sit on the board of. It's called Connected Nation, so I know them fairly well. And they did a lot of work in broadband in the United States over the last 2 or 3 years. And the place where Connected Nation, it started off as Connect Kentucky. And the economy in Kentucky is farming. There's a lot of tobacco farming there. It's mining. There's a tremendous amount of coal in Kentucky. And there's a kind of tourism. Most people know of the Kentucky Derby, the horse race. That is what drives their economy. And you think about this, farming, mining, tourism, not too different than some of the strengths of the economies in Chile. Very, very similar. What they showed here was that by working very closely with all the service providers, mapping towns, mapping villages, mapping all the rural areas, mapping the farms, that they could show where there wasn't broadband. And they showed that you could get an increase in broadband faster than projection by showing the gaps in the broadband of 7% in just over a year, actually. And looking at that, if that could be applied, that 7% increase in broadband to the whole of the United States, that would be worth 2.4 million jobs. And it would be worth 134 billion US dollars of economic growth. So a massive amount of economies. Some of this came from reduced healthcare, some came from reduced cost of traveling, so the gasoline, the work from home, the carbon footprint went down in this, and the jobs were created. So very, very big program, and that's also one of the most popular studies done about 1 year ago in this, and I know this group because I sit on the board of them in there. Now, before I go there, I want to just give you the investment conversation you started off with. Intel's philosophy and investment is a very simple one, and it came from Gordon Moore and Andy Grove back in the 80s. And in 1985 was the 1 year Intel lost money. We had a very poor year in 1984. We barely broke even. But 85 and 86 was one of the worst semiconductor recessions we can remember. I remember we took a $200 million loss one of those years and haven't had one of those since. In that period, Grove and Moore said 3 things on recessions. Number 1 is they always end. Number 2 is you don't save your way out of a recession. You don't save your way out as a semiconductor company. And number 3 is you always come out faster with new products and new ideas and new technologies. So that is what's been ingrained in us. Everyone in Intel believes that, and it's the way we work and act. So all of our thinking is that way. And when you look at, we did this in the 80s where we invested in the 386. We invested a tremendous amount in this. We could have made money in the 85 to 86 if we cut back the R&D. We chose not to. We increased it. We went into that recession about 6 months ahead of our competitors, and we came out of it 3 years ahead because we invested and they cut back. Very important lesson. Now, right now, we go into 32 nanometer factories inside Intel, and we've recently announced we're investing $7 billion in that technology because we won't cut back. We have to get to the next technology for faster chips, lower power chips, more capable platforms. We need those, so we're investing quicker and earlier. We have to do that. So our philosophy is you invest, you don't try and save your way out of tough times. Now, that applies to countries as well. I was the managing director of Asia Pacific for Intel back in the late 90s. So China was my territory, India, Southeast Asia, Korea, Australia, all of those. And one of these sticks out in my mind as a country that did this. Back in 1998, 11 years ago, my first year in Asia, and Taiwan. And in that time frame, there was an Asian contagion, that contraction of Asia. The economies collapsed in many countries. The Korean won changed by 2x, over 200% to the dollar. The Indonesia rupiah collapsed by 500%. One of them was worth a fifth of that in terms of currency change. The Thai baht, the currencies all around Southeast Asia completely collapsed, as did Korea. And in that, everyone cut back. 2 exceptions, actually 3 exceptions. The one that was the most prevalent was Taiwan. They increased their investment like crazy. Every week I would meet them, I would talk to them, we're increasing. You must put more people there. You need to support our labs. Give us more technical support. So everyone's cutting back. No, we're growing. And what it turned out is they invested their money in development of laptops, development of IT equipment build, design, and manufacturing. And they turned out to create a lot of high-value jobs. They became the #1 force in mobile computing and PC building, and a lot of the IT equipment. I think that seed was sown 11 years ago in the toughest Asian recession I think we can remember. India was very similar in, they said we're going to focus on software, outsourcing, and systems integration. Every time I'd go to India, that was all I would hear. Software, outsourcing, systems integration. They doubled down, and they brought that value, and that drove a lot in the Indian economy.